Hello and welcome to the Elevate Dataviz show, number 30. Hello, everyone. We have a nice round number today, 30, and three people here. Duncan hopefully will join us soon. This show is here to explore current topics in data visualization, share our creative inspiration, and the tools and techniques that we're experimenting with as practicing information designers. And today we have a really fun question that we'll be chatting about and each of us answering. It is, if we could go back and give ourselves advice at the beginning of our data viz career, what would it be? So we'll have some fun to see what kind of advice we'd give our younger selves. I am Allie Torben. We also have Gabrielle Marit and Will Chase. And before we jump in, the show is supported by the members of the Elevate DataViz Learning community who get the opportunity to watch and ask questions live. And if you would like to do that and you want to level up your DataViz skills in a supportive community, check out elevatedataviz.com. Okay, so if you are watching live, you can drop any questions that you think of while you're watching in the chat and we'll get to it. So let's see. Will, do you have maybe some initial thoughts of what kind of advice you'd give yourself when you first were thinking about the pivot going into data viz?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there was never, like, for me, there was never a moment that I was like, today I am like becoming a data viz designer,
Mm-hmm.
It almost felt like an accident of how I got here. It didn't feel like a purposeful, like there was probably a time, I think there was a time when I really did sit down and I was like, okay, I want to do design, do data viz. So I'm going to like start getting these books and learning this stuff. But I feel like by the time I had got there, it was already like, I had already spent maybe like a year or two just kind of like fumbling around and like somehow stumbling into this thing.
Were you making visualizations and also sharing them at that time?
Yeah, I was. But it was really, like I said, it was really like an accident almost. It was just for fun. And it was more
Uh-huh.
because I was like, I actually started in the R community, the
Mm-hmm.
coding language R. And so, a lot of R is like for data science and visualization. And so that was like a natural thing to do. And so I, at one point, started just making a lot of charts and sharing them. Like there was a lot of community engagement around
Mm-hmm.
R. And so there
Yeah.
were all these initiatives like Tidy Tuesday, which would be, like they'd post a data set every Tuesday and people would like be encouraged to make charts and share them online. So I was doing stuff like that, but it wasn't like in my head at that point, I wasn't thinking to myself like, oh, this is because I'm going to be a data viz designer. So I'm like practicing and building my skills. I was just like, I'm having fun and I want to learn a new thing. And I
Hmm.
didn't ever see that necessarily. Like at that point in my life, I don't think I could foresee like this will be my career and I'm like taking steps towards it.
Mm-hmm.
So to get back to your original question, initial thoughts on like advice that I would give myself. I think like I was thinking about this before the show and I thought I was trying to think like what would I do differently? And there are probably some things, but I think actually like the biggest takeaway that I thought from what advice I would give myself is like do what you did, basically. Like
Mm-hmm.
so like I don't think the things that I think I did well were like learning broadly, so just focusing on gaining new skills without like putting too much pressure on myself of like I need to like check off this list of things in
You
order
did
to.
start with one tool too. Do you think that that was smart to do,
Yeah,
to like really focus and go deep on one tool to start?
yeah, I do think I think it was helpful to focus on one tool, but I think more so than that perhaps it was a good tool that I chose because it
Mm.
had a community around it. And so I
Yes.
think starting in a place where you have already a supportive and engaged community of learners that exist is like was really key for me because there were lots of people both at my stage of learning that were felt like peers, that we were participating in something together, and there were like a whole ladder of mentors up to
Mhm.
the top level of this this space.
So many
That
people
were
writing blog posts and pasting
yeah,
code and pictures. So it's kind of easy to be like, I want to do something like this. And then you can find all
yeah,
these posts on the internet that show you exactly how to
yeah.
do it.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, I think that was part of it. And the other thing that worked out well was that I was really just, like I said, not focusing on like what I thought was going to be the most marketable skill or like the thing that was on, job applications, like skill requirements. I was focusing instead on whatever I found interesting at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you start out learning, there's so much. I mean, the field of data viz, it's, infinitely wide. You can gather any number of skills in tons of different coding languages, design aspects of design, the entire world of design is open to you.
Mm-hmm.
Data science, writing, storytelling, like we've talked about how broad this is. And a lot of people, when they first get into it, it's really overwhelming. They're like, well, how am I ever going to get to this point? Because I need to learn all this stuff and become an expert at all these things. But that was not where I came at it from. I just came at it from like, ooh, there's a new interesting thing that I'm intrigued by. Let me explore that and do that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then actually later in my career, I got some advice from Matt Daniels at the Pudding. Gave me the exact same piece of advice. I was like, I have all these projects going on, these personal projects, and I'm trying to juggle them and I'm not finishing them. And I feel guilty that like I have this one thing that's languishing. But right now I'm not really interested in that. Like I'm interested in this new shiny thing that like, but I shouldn't start it yet, right? Because I need to finish the other thing. And he was like, just work on whatever you're most interested in at the moment. Like when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to personal projects, like, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously if you have work, you have deadlines,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah. Do your work.
do your work. But he was like, just work on whatever you're interested in, because that's where you'll be most productive, most efficient, most
Mm-hmm.
engaged, and that's where you're going to do your best work.
Yeah, you'll keep up with it too. I mean, how many times are we
Yeah,
like, I'm going to learn this because I'm supposed to, and then any bump in the road or a little bit of time passes, and you're just like finding it
yeah.
harder and harder to get back to it.
Yeah, so those I guess are those are two of my initial takeaways, I suppose, would be like find a existing supportive community,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's around a tool or around a concept or a niche or something, and then work on whatever you're most interested in at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that you said, it kind of relates to one thing that I had written down was know that you'll evolve in your journey and what you want is going to change. And that's okay. And that's normal. And it would be weird if it didn't, like you weren't
Yes,
so tied to one thing, like I'm going to be an R programmer doing
right.
research on this particular thing. You weren't so tied to it. You're like, I'm just going to explore. And I think that attitude helped you, like you said, like experiment and try different things and move on when it wasn't interesting or fun for you anymore, and it led you to where you are now, which is still an exploration and a journey.
Yeah, yeah, that's great advice, I think, because as I mean, we're seeing this now where lots of there's lots of like it's a tumultuous time, I would say, in the industry, especially if
Mm-hmm.
you're in the tech industry, the design industry. I mean, it's touching everything, nonprofits. So, wherever you are in the data viz world, I'm sure people have heard of layoffs or, slowdowns in business or things changing. AI is changing, of course, the way that like what people are looking for in jobs and how businesses are operating. And like the one thing that is always true is that adaptability is king. So like, if you can adapt to different situations and be okay with changing and saying I'm not just going to do the same thing, or like I'm really like tied to this one idea of what I do because that's what I did in the past, but you're able to adapt and change in the future. um, that's the key to success, I think, or the key to longevity in
Mm-hmm.
any industry.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good advice. Be adaptable and see it as a journey, not a let me get to the final destination as quick as possible.
Well, and all those past experiences, it's not like throwing things away. I think sometimes people have a little bit of a trepidation because they're like, well, I invested so much time in, learning R, and now I'm not using that, or I'm not doing
Mm-hmm.
that, or isn't that a waste of time? Haven't I given something up?
Yeah.
But no, not at all. Of course not. I mean, besides the fact that just we have times in our life where we do things, and just because you're not doing that in the future doesn't mean it wasn't a worthwhile endeavor. But I've used everything that I've learned in my life when I changed skills. I was a scientist for years doing research and pipetting and using microscopes, and still every day I use the skills that I learned then, or somehow that informs
You piping stuff out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've got good thumb dexterity from the pipetting, and that really helps.
Good in the kitchen with decorating cakes.
Yeah. So, yeah, view it as a buildup of experiences, whether or not it's directly related to what you're doing next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Gabby, how about you? What's something that you would tell your early self?
I struggle with this question a lot. I will say I agree with Will on. I think we're about to see, especially the AI thing and all that, and more. I think it's being confirmed. Like we see kind of a rise in like what I would call. I think what's his name? This is a guy on LinkedIn that does a lot of like. Anyway, he calls it super senior IC. So, ICs are like people that grow up in the company, but they don't become management.
Independent contributors? Is that what I see?
That's what that means. And
individual, I think.
Individual.
I think it's individual, yeah, individual contributors. And that's usually a very specialized designer in the case of design, but they also usually are like very much, the reason why they're not leadership, they don't go into leadership, is that they don't manage people, but they're often still very high up. They still do a lot of like strategy consulting kind of activities, but also they're very much hands-on still, like in the Figma file with you. I think we're going to see more and more in that. Like, this is what I'm seeing, especially right now, where I work closely with a lot of tech companies, whether they're like startup or like big ones. And we're seeing like leaner teams where somebody is able to do a lot of things very well. And so to the point of what Will is saying, I tend to agree to that. Like, I think there's going to be big strength is being, of course, you want to be specialized, but don't be specialized to the point that you're not flexible enough. And I really think that dataviz has so many places. Actually, I'm going to call it information design, has so many spaces where it can be applied to, including in strategy. And I can go more into that if you want. But I think that if you can combine that with really high knowledge and other expertise, for me, for instance, obviously I'm good at dataviz, but I'm really good at product design, like UI. I'm really good at that. And I'm pretty good at that aspect of like design system. So not just UI, but like thinking of UI in a design system, in a system approach. And so that makes me a really good candidate for platforms that have like data products. Like it's a UI, it's heavy in UI, it has a ton of data, so you need that aspect. It has a ton of chart, but also there's a lot of UI stuff that you need to think about. And usually it's in system because it's part of a big website. And that's my like one of my like combining thing. The other one was like in my career, I combined Photoshop skills with chart skill, and that allowed me to do a lot of creative campaigns. And the research, like Will, I think that research mindset led me to like pursue things like behavior research and things like that, and how to approach campaign differently. So I tend to agree. I think keeping that curiosity open and like always keep learning and learn from others. I think we tend to be a bit siloed, especially now. I think with virtual, we all work remotely, and I'm a big proponent of working remotely. But I think when we do that, we tend to be less curious about what the neighbors is doing in our company. Like, hey, you're the product designer. Like, I only do the chart. Like, can you show me how you do component? Like, I think if we can still bridge that gap even remotely of like learning, I think that's something that I didn't do so well, and I wish I had done earlier in my work. And I think it led me to point number 2, which is I was really, really bad at stepping outside of my comfort zone. So I was like, my role is to do a junior designer. So I did junior design. And I always had opinions and be contrarian, and I always thought a bit strategically about things. But I would always speak about those to my direct colleague and not leadership. And I think that's a mistake I've made, which is like, don't try to impose your ideas on leadership. That's going to go bad. But be curious about the experience of others and actually reach out to leadership to ask, like, what is my role? What is your role? And what is my role? How can my role serve you? I think we forget, at least personally, I still forget today. And I've made the mistake even recently. Like I had a long-term contract with a client, and I wish I had pushed leadership a little more to sit down with them and be like, what's your constraints? You know, because I've spent a lot of time with like leadership, but more like direct leadership, like think creative director, not head of design, and like people around me. But so I had a good understanding of the issues and the problem and things I could help solve in that space. But I didn't take enough time to get to know the higher level and to really understand what their constraints were and how I could help them. And I think that in that sense, that blocked a lot of my initiatives as a designer. I think it prevented me from learning how the company works, what was coming down the street 6 months later, because you don't get to see that when you're at my level. So, and you also don't get feedback in that sense. You ask feedback to your colleagues, or like, do you like me? Or maybe your direct manager. But I think it's important. I wish I had taken more, instead of just bouncing and be like, I don't like you guys, bye, I'm quitting.
Nobody appreciates me.
I kind of tend to do that. I'm kind of like, I hate this, bye. Like, this is kind of how it works.
Gabby, I'm curious, what would you give as advice to people who are, so you said like, you know, in the beginning of your career, you didn't do this because you thought of yourself as like a more junior designer. And to be fair, like you were, you know, you had less experience, you didn't have as much name recognition or reputation behind you. So how would you advise somebody who maybe is in that position, who feels like, I'm kind of new to this, maybe I don't have as much reputation, and so like it's inappropriate for me to push, like how would you approach someone who's like a leadership or a senior person with something that feels like a push?
I want to be transparent and say that I still struggle with it first. It's just hard to do. I think one thing that has helped me is come in as instead of like, I'm going to teach somebody, or I have to do something for them, or I need to like do something. It's more like, I'm actually trying to ask you questions so I can better serve you. Like, I'm not trying to impose something or sell them something or sell them myself even. It's like, it's really, and it's hard still. It's like I come in and I just want to ask you a question to be understand how I can be of better service to you, even if you're junior. And unfortunately, sometimes it's great. Sometimes suddenly, like, you're like, oh, like that's why everything gets blocked. Like that's why nothing is working. Or like we tried so many things because like they have somebody else that has a different priority above them, or they themselves don't have the power to start a new something. Sometimes they're bad at formulating what the issue is, and then you get stuck. So it happens. But I think at least if you come in a place of like, what can I do to help you as an individual and also the business as a whole, no one would say no to that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you're like somebody who's like, how can I help you? Like, sometimes the answer is, I don't know, you know, which in this case, I think to me is indicative of something is happening that doesn't make sense, because like you should know why somebody's part of the company and how they could help you a little more, I think. So that happens. But usually they have a sense. They're like, hey, and they'll tell you, usually they don't know right away. So you kind of have to sit with them a little bit and be like, you know, and you can even like talk about what you did or what didn't work. Be like, why did we not do this? Or, you know, you can explain what you see, but you need to really come in as a place of like curiosity of like, I'm seeing this. Do you think that's correct? Like how I'm interpreting the situation as a very junior level. You can even say so. Like I come in and I'm like, I don't know as much as you do. Like, it's not my place to tell you how to do your job. I do it all the time. I'm like, it's really not my place to give you any advice, but I need to understand the situation to do my job better, to help you. So can you help me understand that situation? I think it's a great way to get feedback and learn faster and really understand also the business. I think that's something that I'm only right now finally learning after 8 years. I mean, really, I feel like a couple of years ago, I started understanding there's a business outcome. And if you don't take that into account, you will get frustrated because that leads everything downstream. And as designers, we're like, we just need to be pretty. And they're like, we don't care.
Where's the money coming from?
I think that's a great point about coming to it with like an inquisitive mindset, like a questioning mindset. Like you said, if you go in guns blazing, like, hey, I want to do this, here's my proposal, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, it's maybe not going to be as well, but like, I think another, like maybe a great point of also some things to keep in mind of framing stuff is one, like people at that level are busy. They don't have a lot of time. They don't want to waste time. And they want to make sure that they're focused on the solutions. So, you know, like Gabby said, coming in and asking questions and saying like, hey, I would like to ask you some strategic questions to make sure that we're really aligned on the solutions for this project and what our goals are for this project and our whatever, so that we're not wasting time. You know, I don't want to go in the wrong direction. I want to make sure we're all on the same page and heading in the right direction before I
trying to
start
understand the bigger picture here.
Yeah, exactly, the big picture, so that I'm not wasting our customers' time, your team's time, your time, etc. And that will like probably, you know, kick off the conversation in a good direction, on a good note.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll add one more. I wish I had promoted myself more. I think I'm really, really terrible at it. I think we have such a, I don't know if it's my like religious education or because I'm a Muslim woman. I have no idea what the cultural aspect of it or was even like a personal thing. But I've always had a really hard time saying, hey, I did this thing. It was just like, I do it, and then people should realize I do this thing and it's exceptional. And sometimes it's great. Don't get me wrong. I really think I was doing a lot of things that were really, really helpful to the company. But if you don't talk about it, no one will actually give you like feedback, but also like no one will actually realize that you did that thing, even if it's helpful and everybody uses that thing moving forward. And I've noticed that some people, there's a trend, it tends to be dudes, they tend to be a certain ethnicity, but they are really good at it. I like giving themselves the flowers of like, I did this thing. It's not like, look at me, I'm exceptional, but just like, FYI, here's this very practical thing I did. And every week they would be like, I did this thing. And I just felt like the work should speak on its own. And because I was doing a really good job, it would be acknowledged. And I'm realizing now that that's a mistake. Regardless, of course, people would see that your work is really good, but I think if you don't say it, no one will see it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think also like that's kind of it's interesting because I read something recently that I thought was kind of interesting since I was like earlier this year at one point preparing, like doing some portfolio work, like preparing job applications. And that's always a kind of an awkward situation, or it can be when you've done work as part of a team, because, you know, the truth is these days, like everything we do is part of a team. And so you want to like make sure you're giving credit to other people and not taking too much credit and being clear about like what your role was and all that. But what this person that I was reading was saying was like, basically just like take control of the work that you did and what you did. Don't be too concerned about this. Like, of course, you know, if you're presenting, for example, a portfolio project, you can say, yes, here was the team, this was my role at the top. But from there on out, you don't need to constantly be saying, we did this. You can say, I did this, I did this. It's understood that these days, everything happens as a part of a team. So you don't need to be constantly like, you know, couching all of your responses with like, oh, but by the way, I was just a part of that. I didn't do the whole thing, you know?
Yeah, which is hard to do because you want to make sure you don't give yourself too much credit. But I mean, if you think about it, if you were on a team again, then would you be able to do the same things? I mean,
exactly.
You'd probably be able to get pretty close. Of course, it depends on the caliber of the other people on the team. But if you would be able to redo your contribution, then that's all they want to know.
Yep. Yeah. And, you know, like, yeah, of course, we get feedback on things. We work together. You know, I design something and then I take it to the rest of my team and my colleagues to get feedback and edits. And then I make those edits, or maybe they make suggestions that I incorporate into my work. But when I'm writing about it, that doesn't mean I have to say like, well, I helped to design this button component and then we, you know, did this and this. I can say like, I designed this button component, you know, yes, I got feedback on it. Yes, somebody maybe gave me some ideas or help, but I still did this, you know, I did that work.
Yeah. You have to be a strong proponent of yourself because like Gabby said, like no one's going to do it for you. I mean, maybe once in a blue moon, someone will sing your praises for you, but super rare. You got to speak up for yourself.
Yeah.
Duncan, how about you? What would you tell young Duncan?
Yeah, I don't know if I have that much that we haven't covered already. We've done lots of good advice. I definitely, I was sort of thinking a lot about when we were talking about tooling, and like which tools to go for and things like that, and absolutely echo the advice about using what you're excited about. Like, I think ideally you want to get to a place where you've got like, I don't know, like one main tool that you love and you use a lot, and then a bunch more tools that you kind of play with, but also some tools that you actively ignore, like that everybody else is like really, really into, and you're just like, meh, doesn't seem like me. Like for me, that has always been like Tableau. Other people are super into Tableau. I'm not. It's just like I don't get excited about it, and so I've never kind of like learned how to use it, and I've built like a career just fine ignoring Tableau. I apologize to people from Tableau who are watching this. It could be like insert name of whatever here. There's nothing wrong with Tableau. I'm sure it's wonderful software, but I never kind of vibed with it in a way that made me want to use it. And I think kind of having some tools you actively ignore is quite useful in narrowing down that field and just like not feeling like you have to be on absolutely everything.
Yeah, that's such an impossible feeling.
It really is. Yeah. So deciding actively what you're not going to get into is just as useful as deciding what you want to get into. And also kind of like related to the tools thing, like I think there's a tendency, and I've definitely been guilty of this in the past, of just doing tutorials and tutorials and tutorials and never actually making anything of my own with something. And that's not how you learn. Right, you like do a tutorial and get the sort of like figure out how to use the interface of whatever tool it is, but then once you've done that and you've sort of just about know your way around a little bit, make something with it, and that will teach you so much more than like doing more and more tutorials ever will. So,
yeah, and you'll find specific things that you want to learn, and then you can research that
exactly
and learn that tutorial.
Yeah, and find out kind of like how to not like break, but how to sort of like use tools in ways that they're not supposed to be used. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I probably call my use of Figma this, like, you know, it's supposed to be for making apps and like websites and things like that. I don't use it for that most of the time. Like I just use it as a kind of regular vector design software. And I've been using it like that for, I don't know, 5 years or something like that. And it's going great. So like there's absolutely ways in which you can use unconventional tools for other things. And this sort of, I think, ties into sort of some of these things around building up your own style and things like that. Sometimes like using a tool for not really what it's supposed to be used for can be a really interesting way of doing something a bit unique that other people aren't doing. And when we were talking earlier about you know, building up of lots of sort of different experiences and nothing is ever wasted, 100% agree with that at all. And that's what makes you, this kind of like weird combination of pipetting and like the other things that Will has done. But I mean, you know, you might be in a situation in the future where you're trying to design a data visualization and you start thinking, wouldn't it be cool if like the data dripped in from the top as if it were coming out of a pipette? And somebody who'd been an architect for 5 years would never have that thought, but you did. And that can become part of your, you know, the magic ingredients that makes you. So I think that
just how you say pipette is making me laugh.
Me too.
I really want to say pipette now.
So fancy.
Do you not say pipette?
I say pipette, but
Yeah, pipette.
do you say? Really? What do you say, Will?
Yeah, pipette.
Pipette, but pipette sounds so much better.
Yeah,
even in French, Gabby.
No, in French it's pipette.
Yeah.
Okay,
Pipette.
bit closer.
I don't know. I totally agree, Duncan, though, about using, because that was another thing that I did, using the tools in an unconventional way. I mean, I started using R to make generative artwork, which was, I mean, nobody, all the languages, you know, lots of people made generative artwork. I think like at the time that I started doing it, 3 people made it using R. So, you know, being one of those 3 people obviously just got attention right away. And now there's many more people doing it, which is wonderful. So
yeah, I have some experience with Photoshop. It's like I did collage because I was really good at Photoshop and digital painting. So not just collage, but like putting them into a landscape and like painting behind the shadows and things. I just knew how to do it, and so I did it because that's the only skill I had. more than anything
Yeah,
else.
it became your style.
Use the
Yeah.
tools you got in
Part
front
of your
you.
style.
Yeah, I mean, Will, it's quite funny because you were using dataviz software to make generative art, and I was using generative art tools like this pen plotter to make dataviz for a little
Oh,
while. So
that's
it's
right.
Right.
We
Right.
probably should have teamed up a bit more there.
Yeah. Someday, a future collab coming your way
Yeah.
soon. Yeah.
You can call each other Pipette and Pipette. Pipette.
Oh, God.
Pipette and pipette.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing was we were sort of like talking about goals and sort of following what's interesting to you. I think it is useful to have a goal, but sort of I think it's important to let that goal change as much as you want it to. So like have some direction that you're going in. Don't just be kind of like have your eyes closed, stumbling blindly. Like be trying to do something, but be totally chill about that thing changing. Like even on a weekly basis, if you want it to. It probably wouldn't be a weekly basis, but like maybe year to year or every couple of years, totally fine to change like the direction that you're going in.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a really important thing. And then, also, community, so important. Like this is what keeps you going when you start struggling a bit or run into difficulties or can't figure out what to do. It's like shock absorbers when a kind of the bumps in the road come along, like you were talking about. Like it's that community that will absorb those shocks and keep you going in a more comfortable way. I think that there is sort of a tendency right now when you run into, I don't know, like you can't figure out how to do something in software. People go to AI now in a way that they used to go to communities. And I think you really miss out on something if you go to AI immediately, not just because AI will quite often get the answer wrong, but also because you are missing out on other contextual stuff, other buildups of experience from other people that are like, yeah, I tried to do that once and it didn't really work out very well. But if you try this tool or something, whereas the AI will be like, yeah, you do it like this.
And it might
and that's
be
it.
completely wrong. Or
Right,
completely
exactly.
wrong.
Well, I mean, and there's of course just the practical aspect that like being a part of a community and asking people for help instead of computers is a form of networking as well. I mean, that is, this is many of the people that were mentors or helping me or answering questions like these exact types of situations later were people that maybe led to an introduction for a job or
like, oh, Will does this. He was talking to me about it
for something because they know that. So that's an incredibly important thing to do early in your career.
Yeah, so that was pretty much what I had on my list.
That's your advice to young Dunk.
Yeah, exactly. But it is kind of similar to Will in that it's like, do all the things that you did. Like, I think I've been, quite lucky in that I made a lot of the right choices at the right times, and that has led me to the place where I am now. But, there's always the, I can't remember what it's called. There's a sort of psychological thing where you always think that what you did was the right thing to do.
The survivorship bias, right?
Yeah, probably. Right.
Well, I also heard this quote that it was like, don't make the right decision, make the decision right. Meaning make a decision and then just, work with what you did, with the outcome of it, and make that decision have been right, because you keep pivoting and you just figure it out. So you don't have to always make the right decision, just make the decision right. And I think that's kind of the approach we've been taking. You experiment, you make a decision to look at R, you make a decision to try Flourish or whatever, and then you pivot.
Yeah. Can we, I think, okay. Here's where I struggle with this advice because I agree, right? Like I even said so. Also, I'm a big proponent of not being distracted. So how do you balance that? How do you balance being curious with also being focused?
I think it kind of depends on where you are. Because I mean, Will, is it true at the time you weren't like actively looking to pivot your career, right? You were just kind of experimenting? Because that's kind of.
Yeah. So, I mean, I sort of I was, well, there was a very early phase where I was just kind of like doing whatever. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I was like, I like doing this. And when I had the opportunity to move jobs because my partner was moving, and so I needed to find a new job, it was just like I was interviewing with lots of jobs that had nothing to do at all with dataviz, and they were just like scientist jobs. And then One of them that I interviewed was like, well, I'm looking for someone to help me with data analysis and visualization. And I was like, oh, I can do that. I like doing that. Would you like me to do that for you?
Mm-hmm.
And then it just sort of went from there. But like from there on, I was a little bit, then I was like, oh, okay, maybe this could be a career. And so then I started to get a little bit more serious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the point where I started thinking like, what do I want to do next? And again, maybe I didn't have that like laser focus, like I'm going to be a data journalist for the Washington Post or something. You know, I didn't have like that super thing in mind, but I started to refine and narrow the idea of what I wanted to do. But to Gabby's point about like, how do you balance that kind of like just desire to explore with the like practicalities of, okay, but yes, finishing things does have benefits too, like, and you know, like working towards specific things and accomplishing certain goals is important as well. I think the advice that like Matt was giving and what I kind of, how I interpreted it at least, was that don't just like leave everything as half done always, but like don't feel bad about taking a break from something because you're more interested in a different thing. So, you know, if you're working on developing a skill, you decide like, I want to learn D3 for whatever reason, and you start learning it and you invest a few months into learning it. And then you realize at some point, like, you know, I kind of hate this. Like, I don't want to do that. Don't feel bad about dropping it and moving on to something else. And if you're working on a personal project and you are like, well, this was really fun at the beginning and I kind of, you know, I'd like to finish it, but like, I want to go on to this other thing right now, then let yourself go on to the other thing for a little bit with the hope or the expectation that in the future, when you are, you know, once you've had a break from it, you will probably redevelop that desire to return to that other project, and then you will, and then you'll finish it. So I think maybe the timeline or the time pressure, feeling like everything has to happen sequentially on a schedule at a certain time, is the part that I would like advise against. And I would say like, give yourself some grace, be like, I'm not going anywhere in a hurry. I'm, you know, going to finish these things eventually and do things on my own time, and maybe not in the order that I originally planned, but, you know, it will happen someday.
Not to be contrarian.
You're welcome to disagree. It's not objectively correct advice.
Okay. I do think though that some of what you got, but what you said I think is important. You were like, okay, the first is the idea of like, drop it if you hate it, which I tend to agree. I would say that there's in anything you learn that's new, there will be a dip. They'll be like, this is so fun. Like, I'm learning so much, and you practice it and you're like, oh my God, this sucked. This is so hard. This looks like shit. It's like, and then eventually you're like, oh, actually I got this. And like you go back up and then it kind of plateaus. That's true. So I do think that people tend to drop at the dip. So I think I still feel like people, don't stay forever in uncomfortable zone where really it's not working. But if it's been 6 months, like it's been 2 weeks and you struggle with something, don't give it up just because that's uncomfortable. I think that friction and being uncomfortable is part of growth. And when you're junior, you're going to run into that a lot because you're learning everything from scratch. You know, even for me, when I start something from scratch, it's uncomfortable. Trying to learn 3D in Blender is just pretty much. It's hard. I was like, man, it's a whole new software. Something that can, and then with time, the more you learn, the easier everything gets to be because you know every interface kind of looks the same. Like Duncan even was like, well, I use Figma for vector. I'm like, well, that's because it's kind of set up for it in that sense, and it kind of looks like Illustrator, so it's not so far out. But still, you might struggle a bit. You open it, it's like a complete different interface. Like it is different. You know, at least you have the principle of how vector works, but it behaves differently. But yeah, I just feel like there's an in-between space, and it's hard to define. Personally, I like to give myself like a kind of a rule of like, I do not give up on this thing for at least 6 months. Like I try to give it a proper, fair shot. And to your point, well, sometimes life happens and you have to pause and you have to pick it back up. Like Sometimes you have a full-time job that suddenly becomes really busy and you don't have time. That's fine. But even with my business, that's how I do it. Like right now I'm in the dip. It's been really hard for the last month, even the last couple months. I'm like, I need to keep insisting for a little longer. Like I want to give it a proper fair shot. And if I give up now, it's done. Like I will not pick it back up. So, I think this quality is to giving you a bit of a deadline, like a setup to be like, hey, after, I think Duncan's really good at that because he has like the monthly check-in and the 1 year check-in.
No, it's a great point, but like there's a big difference between like I've been trying this and I've struggled and I've tried harder and I've pushed through it and it's not happening, or I'm still just not into it or whatever. And then, but like to your point, every project I did, every skill I learned, I had that friction. I went through periods where it was horrible and I hated it and I kept doing it because, I had a desire to finish it. I think it's like, does that desire or whatever outweigh what you're going through? Or, like you always have to make these decisions in the moment. I'm
kind of amazed that you're all doing projects that you hate. Like, I don't think I ever hate any of my projects. I'm having like a really good time all the time. And my biggest problem is like dedicating the time to it. Like,
well, I think that's part of it. Like, I don't always hate the project, but sometimes it's really frustrating. Like you go through frustrating periods. No?
Yeah, maybe, but I don't know. Not for very long. I mean, usually that's a signal to me that I'm using the wrong tool. And this is sort of what I wanted to say here. It's like what you're trying to accomplish shouldn't be use this tool to do this thing. It should be do the thing. And if you're not making good progress with that tool, maybe it's the wrong tool. Like your project shouldn't be dig a tunnel under the Atlantic to get to America, right? It should be get to America. And then maybe a better option is going to be sailboat or something like that, I
do like that. I really like that distinction because even in business, for me, it's like, I want to get to a place with studio, but I can refine how I get there. Like currently I'm in the dip because it's hard. And I'm like, is the outcome still even possible? But I'm like, I'm just going to pivot a little bit how I do it. But the goal hasn't changed. So I like that approach. I think
it's also okay to change the goal sometimes as well. Like that's the other thing that I was going to say a minute ago, which is that like, I think one thing that you want to get really, really good at when you are starting over in things is to bite off as little as possible to chew, right? Start projects that are really small and finish them rather than starting off a massive project that you just run out of steam on. And so if your project is small enough, you're never going to get bored. You're never going to like hit that pain point. And then you glue a few of those together and you get bigger and bigger and bigger over time as your comfort level sort of increases with the tools that you're using. Like, I think that's another thing as well. And it's totally okay to, if you're sort of like stuck on something and it's not going anywhere, to decide to move the goalposts and just be like, right, maybe I won't like dig a tunnel to America. Maybe I'll dig a tunnel to Ireland instead. And I'll have a really nice time in Ireland. And that'll be kind of a triumph, Yeah.
I wish I was more like you, Duncan. I'm like aim for maximum, biggest goal you can ever imagine.
You're digging a tunnel to Australia.
I mean, I think the broader thing maybe that I'm encouraging is more like just give yourself grace. Give yourself because to Gabby, like there is a lot of value in setting specific deadlines, specific goals. And I have done that in my career. So there have been projects where, I had this deadline for some competition that I entered and I had to make a project by that deadline. And it almost killed me. I worked like until 2 a.m. every night for a month and I hated it at times, but like I pushed through and I made it and it was great. And it all worked out in the end because I pushed through. But then there were an equal number of times when I was trying to do something and tried pushing through and it just didn't work or didn't happen or I couldn't make it for whatever reason. And I was like, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Everything will work out in the end. I think in general, that was actually another piece of advice I was going to give myself is like, just, it will be okay. So do not catastrophize too much when things don't work out, because things will always not be working out. That's something that's going to happen for your entire life. So
yeah, why wouldn't there be a problem? That's why I try to remind myself when a problem comes. What world where there's no problems?
Yeah. Well, Ali, why don't you talk? Why don't you go for a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I've had very similar things, but I think when I wanted to get into dataviz, I was really wanting to get into dataviz, and I wanted a dataviz job. And it wasn't just like, oh, I'll experiment with this thing. I was like, how do I do this? And I think one thing that I did was smart was I looked at dataviz jobs on LinkedIn, and I looked at all the tools that they were suggesting, and I just picked one or two. I picked Tableau and Mapbox, and I was like, okay, I'm going to just dabble in these and make some things. And at the time I had the podcast, so I used those tools to actually create a visualization that was inspired by whatever I was doing on the podcast that week. So it was time boxed. I had tools that I needed to learn how to use, and I had a piece of inspiration that I needed to jump off of. And by the time the podcast published, I needed to have an inspired visualization. So I had these constraints.
And that's also like there's another thing there that you haven't mentioned, which is the working in public thing.
Yes. Yep.
Like learning in public is like a really good way to learn, because I think that's what gives you some of that motivation when things get a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I've got to do this because there's an audience that's waiting for me to do this,
Yeah. And that is really important. And I know we've given this advice in the Elevate Dataviz learning community where we're like, oh, show your work, share your work. But someone's like, oh, but I'm at the beginning. It's not very good. Like, it's okay to be a beginner. How is the world supposed to know you're a dataviz designer if they don't see you designing dataviz? Before you get the title with, I really just wanted the title with the company, right? Like, if someone else tells me I'm a dataviz designer, then I'm a dataviz designer. But you can get that before that happens just by designing dataviz and sharing it. And then people will see, oh, she designs dataviz.
Also, at the beginning of your career, you're going to have the coolest ideas because, half of your brain is still filled with pipetting or whatever it is that was in there before, you sort of absorb all the orthodoxy of the community that you're moving into.
It's a little side tangent, quick, tiny tip that I want to give based on what Ali said. Your job title can be anything you want it to be, FYI. So if you when you're working at a company, like my titles at companies have been many things, and then on my resume, they have been many entirely other different things. And oftentimes when I apply to different jobs, I will change the title on my resume of my old jobs to suit the job that I'm applying for. Because, when I work at a company, I do many things. And so maybe my title is analyst, but half of my time was actually spent designing. So when I'm applying for a design job, I'm going to say I was a designer at this company.
Yeah, so especially the bigger companies give you some big generic role, and you're like, how is this helpful?
Yes. It means nothing. And the opposite way around. Sometimes you meet people that have been like director of something, and when you meet them, you're like, you vaguely a senior, like very vaguely. Like it means nothing. Like it's completely random from place to place. It means very different things. So I'm also on Will's side. I tend to like tweak it appropriately, because like you've done different. Can I go back to what Ali was saying for a second? I found that really hard when I was young. The idea of like, how do you show your work when it's half done and all that? I found that really hard, especially if the environment you live in is not conducive to that. Because I think we also going to see a lot of like junior designer isolated from the rest, or analysts that's just completely isolated in that analyst team. So there's no people to give them feedback. And I think that connects to Will's advice, which is like find a community. Elevate welcomes you, obviously, if you want to join in. And even at Elevate, I will be like calling out the members. I think we should do more like hands-on design work, because I do think that sometimes it's like they share the things that is final. And I have so many questions at that point. Like they've gone down a rabbit hole, and I've done it. You go down a rabbit hole, you're like, it's going to be like this. You present it, and somebody's like, who is it for?
And then you're mad because you're like, but I finished it already.
And
like,
it's done. Like, just help me refine. And you're like, no, the whole idea was wrong. And that also happens. I've seen happen a lot in agencies, and it's very frustrating. as a junior, I've done it, and I've been the recipient of it, like on the other direction when you're the senior, where a junior would go really down the rabbit hole, and you wish they had shared way early on. Because then I can sit with you, we can exchange, or the community can actually exchange and look at it, be like, maybe your idea is just not so great, and that's fine. Like, we all have random ideas. Like, iterate more on the ideas before you, or more on the wireframe, more on the diagram before you jump into the full UI.
It does feel like at the beginning, I need to be showing polished things, or people are going to think I don't know what I'm doing, but that's not true. I think if you say, hey, I'm working, here's a sketch of what I'm thinking. Do you think this is going in the right direction? So you're like asking for feedback little by little. And then when you're done, it's like, oh yeah, I've seen this. This was the right idea. Maybe move this a little that way, but you're good.
And spend time in context. Like, who's it for? What is it for? Why is the idea so great? Even before sketching. Like, Alan Wilson is I was talking to him this week. He's the principal designer who does all the dataviz at Adobe, and he talks a lot about diagram. He uses a lot of diagram in his work, and I love it. I just love the concept, because to me it speaks a lot to our work, information design. You can organize knowledge and the brief and whatnot by diagram. Like, you could literally have a column of like, who is it for, what is it for, what's the goal, what's the pain point. Like, there's so many times when you can organize knowledge and the brief in that visual way, and that's dataviz, and that's way before you even sketch something out, and it can be super helpful for somebody that either a collaborator, that's the researcher, an analyst, or your boss, to like take a time to look at a visual that's not just yet the outcome. It's just like the visual that helps us think through the project. And I think there's a huge value for us information designer to do that work up front, especially junior, because you're still doing visual, you're still doing information design, and you help organize like the thinking of the project rather than jump into wireframes that are just gonna get rejected and be frustrated right off the bat.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think this point about like sharing work or publishing even work that's not finished it can be potentially even better than publishing something that is finished sometimes, because like if you look at advice for what to do in design portfolios or when you're presenting case studies, a lot of the time people will say, well, you should always include a section about like, what would you do differently? Or like, if you had more time, what would you change? What could you improve about this? Even though it's like the published final version. And so, you know, publishing something that maybe you're like, well, it's not like 100%. Like, that's the real world. When you are in a job in the real world, it's like, okay, it's the deadline. So whatever we have now, we have to publish it today because of this reason. And so you have to be able to say like, I had a time constraint, or I had whatever constraint, and like, this was the place that I got to. This was like the best I could do, and here it is. And like, here's all the stuff I might like to change about it if I had more time.
My boss really liked this color palette and I hated it, so I would change that.
Yeah.
My last tip before we run out of time, I would be a stronger proponent of what I wanted. So if you want something, you need to ask for it. And you know, if you want a particular opportunity, if like you want to go part-time instead of full-time, like anything that you feel like would fit better in your lifestyle, or you want to transition or pivot slightly into a slightly different thing at your company, figure out a way to ask for it. And kind of tying back to what Gabby said, making sure you're tying it to like the business goals, that is always helpful. But don't be afraid to be an advocate for yourself. And just because no one has ever done it before doesn't mean it's impossible. And sometimes, especially if you are a valued person on your team, your manager will likely try to help you figure it out. So be a proponent for yourself.
Huge plus on that. Like, so many of the best opportunities in my career have been through just me being like, do you think I could do this? And then being like, yeah,
sure.
Why not?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. And you don't have to feel sheepish about asking for things. Like, you're not demanding, you're just putting it out there into the universe, like Ellie said.
It's nice to show that you're proactive and thinking about like your future. And, you know, a lot of people are just, just want to hang back and do the couple things that they are given to do. But some people want to be doing extra things and pivoting, and people like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, when I joined Axios, I joined as just a graphics reporter. So I was just making charts, but I had aspirations to do long form visual storytelling, to run a team doing that. And even though I was new to data journalism at the time, I think in one of my one-on-ones with my boss, within the first 6 months of having that job, I just said, hey, FYI, like someday I would like to only be doing long form storytelling, and I would like to actually run a team within the company that focuses just on that. And it was like, I know this is very early and far away and whatever company pressures, but like, let's keep talking about this, and hopefully someday we can make this happen.
Yeah, you planted your own seed.
And it did. Yeah. It took another year and a half to get that to happen, but it did happen eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Okay, my little pipettes, it's time to wrap up. Thanks for joining us today. If you have any follow-up questions, or if you have any of your own advice, we would love if you joined us in the Elevate DataViz learning community. You can find out more about it and how to join at elevatedataviz.com. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.